So welcome to our first Imposter Syndrome event presented by Lighthouse Labs Career Accelerator in partnership with Dyspatch. I want to give Janni as much time as possible today, so I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Career Accelerator initiative and to Dyspatch, but then we'll get started, don't worry. So the intention of the Career Accelerator is to support individuals who are interested in exploring a career in technology through workshops, resources, and events from on the ground in the industry. To do so, we're working with industry partners and leveraging over 6 years of experience working with individuals launching their careers in technology. We're excited to present this series in partnership with Dyspatch, an email production platform that allows teams to streamline their entire email creation process through a robust drag and drop email builder, collaboration features, and approval workflows. Dyspatch believes that growing the communities around them is equally important to growing their business, and by doing that, they only get stronger. With that being said, we couldn't be more excited to be joining forces with them on this initiative. We're excited to have Janni here for a discussion about imposter syndrome, a feeling many of us are all too familiar with. As the Director of Technology and Society at UVic, a mentor, mother, and educator with a PhD in political science, an MA in liberal arts and sciences, and a BA in women's studies, I cannot think of a better person to have this conversation with. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. Number one, please keep yourself muted for this session just so that we can have the recording run through as smoothly as possible. And number two, if you have any questions or comments that come up throughout the presentation, and we hope they do, please just throw them in the chat. Elena and myself will be monitoring that, and we'll try to make sure they all get answered at the end of the session. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Janni to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where you are today.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the invitation to participate. I've worked with Carolyn before for a different event, and I didn't even read the entire email. I just saw the invitation from Carolyn and was like, yes. And then I read it after the fact and thought, okay, I can do this. Because you always want to work with good people in the community, right? So for my introduction and how I got here, you know, it's been, the path has been not straightforward. I've been in Canada now for 16 years. I'm an American expat, although I now hold Canadian citizenship for 2 years. I participated in a National Science Foundation workshop, I don't know, 4 years ago. And my abstract was, according to academia, I've had spectacular failures. I, did my degrees, chose to not apply for jobs in places where I didn't want to live, which I could do because my partner was supporting us. But honestly, I just couldn't see living in upstate New York or somewhere in Iowa, given that all my family is on the West Coast in Southern California. And I also chose to start a family early. And what you find in academia is that most women, or people who identify as women, tend to have families closer to getting tenure or after tenure, or they just don't have children. In political science especially, the trailblazers, if you will. So I, did things my own way. Part of that stemmed from my dissertation supervisor. There's only about a handful of American political scientists that we know that have 4 kids, because most, if they have a family, it's 1. And when she and another colleague from Albuquerque, New Mexico had 3, that was surprising. But I don't think that my career has been a spectacular failure. I've just kind of done things my way. So how did I get here? Well, I did the Women's Studies BA, a minor in political science, kind of hung out at San Diego State in Southern California, hoping for them to found their MA program in women's studies. But by the time they did, I was already matriculated into my PhD program in political science. I've always been kind of an early adopter with my teaching and learning and technology use. And, one of the first publications that I had was looking at women in cyberspace. And then later there were other research projects related to technology. So I kind of fell into it. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a computer scientist, I'm a political scientist, a feminist political scientist at that. And when I was thinking of this event and the different moments or periods in my career when I felt like I had imposter syndrome or I just didn't belong, it was definitely in graduate school. Because San Diego State, is a Hispanic serving institution, although I do prefer the word Latina, Latino, and Latinx to Hispanic. And so when I went to graduate school, I noticed that the environs, the professors I was working with, it was more elite and more white and more men as well. And I distinctly remember one of my first American Political Science Association conferences being in the washroom and kind of hyping myself up to go to some events because there were very few people that looked like me. And when I earned my PhD, a mentor, Dr. Christine Sierra, told me that I was, and I'm going to get this wrong because it's been several years since I earned my PhD, but she told me that it was either number 34 or number 36 in the United States for Mexican American women who had a PhD, who earned a PhD in political science. So the entire country of Canada has 2 or 3 million fewer than the state of California. So if we look at the entire country of the United States, in 2002, 2003, I wasn't even the 40th Mexican-American woman in the United States with a PhD in political science. That's how low the numbers are. And so I, ended up going to some of the race and ethnicity politics sections, Latino, Latina sessions to work and network with people who I had something in common with, our background, our ethnic background. That sort of thing, because higher ed is extremely white. I mean, even at my home institution now at UVic, if we look at our upper executive, everyone is white with the exception of the CIO. She's Chinese Canadian. And when I say this, I mean, we're talking more than a dozen people who have vice president after their name. The CIO, for all intents and purposes, is a VP. And going to tech events, be it if it's EDUCAUSE or BCNet, I also find that the diversity is lacking in terms of gender and race. And if we were to be in Toronto or certain parts of Vancouver for that matter, we definitely would see more diversity. The island isn't exactly speaking to the diversity of our entire country. I don't know if that's enough for the introduction because I know you have several wonderful questions. And if I keep on looking to my left, I have, my 4 screens set up. My questions are over here. So it's not that, one of my cats are distracting me. I am in the office, my cats are at home, but I might look at the questions. So Carolyn, what do you think?
I think that's a great introduction, and I think it's a really good segue into my next question about how would you describe imposter syndrome in your own words? Because I think it is something that's so defined by our own experience of it. So given your unique personal and professional experiences, how would you define imposter syndrome?
I would define imposter syndrome as that moment in which you feel like you don't belong. And it's not necessarily that you're not good enough, but maybe you haven't been invited or allowed to speak, or maybe you're just not invited, you're overlooked. So it's not just this moment of feeling underqualified. It also can be just not having an opportunity to participate.
I think that's great. So from the research that's been done on imposter syndrome so far, is it reveals that many university students, particularly but not limited to first-generation university goers, suffer from feelings that they somehow got into the position they're in through a fluke, or that they're there because they're from an underrepresented group and don't actually belong there. What are some of the ways that you see imposter syndrome play out at the academic level?
Well, at San Diego State, when I was an undergrad, I started to notice this pattern of my professors telling me either in a paper, in a comment, or either in their office hours, wow, your English is really good. And it took me a while to realize, wow, you don't expect me to be smart. And so I'm surprising you. You know, thank you. I mean, it was kind of a backhanded compliment. You know, it's like people referring to Obama when he was running for president as being articulate. You have to be mindful of certain things that you say to people of color. And, you know, definitely saying something about your English or lack of an accent says a little bit more than what you might intend to say. So I've witnessed that personally. I've had students share things like that as well in terms of their academic ability. And I'll share an anecdote from a student who is what we would generally think of someone who could model. And at graduation, she told me that she was very thankful that I always treated her like I treated all of my other students. But apparently, because she's quite attractive, she was often treated like she was stupid by her other professors. So the imposter syndrome and not belonging can be on a bunch of things: age, size, looks, accent, your name, that sort of thing.
I think that's really important in those two experiences that you mentioned. I think a lot of people can probably relate to. So from those experiences, when you are put on the spot with imposter syndrome, I know a lot of people sometimes tend to, the knee-jerk reaction is to respond with defensive arrogance, like acting like they know everything, or being defeated and trying to overemphasize the things that they don't know. What are the different ways that individuals can respond to feelings of imposter syndrome, and what would you say the most effective way an individual can combat and conquer those feelings of inadequacy?
I think we need to think about what's going on. You know, someone might not have the intention of being cruel or mean. For instance, with that personal anecdote about, you know, an array of different professors telling me that my English was so good, you know, they really felt that they were complimenting me. Like, way to go, Janai. But it was kind of a backhanded compliment. So, you know, one of the things is to think about empathy and kindness, because these different forms of microaggression, you don't want to be angry all the time. So you need to respond in a way that works for you, and you can't always be defensive. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is when I feel that someone is trying to let me know that they think I don't belong. For instance, I can think of a director on campus who made a comment about how technology is for the boys and the girls teach. I became very confused and said, well, what do you mean by that? I don't understand that comment. And he started to backtrack and ultimately apologized. But I acted like I didn't understand. Oh, I knew what he meant, and I could feel my heart beating, you know, even faster because I didn't like it. I mean, I was more tech savvy than, you know, he is, but he was new to UVic and was just being a jerk sort of in that moment. And so I had a series of questions. It's just like when someone makes an inappropriate joke and you don't laugh, and you say, well, what do you mean by that? You know, it might give that person pause to think, oh, maybe this was an inappropriate comment.
And it's a really good opportunity for learning too, for people who are unconscious of the things that they're saying. So given those experiences that you just shared and Mary shared a similar one in the chat as well. We know that the feelings of imposter syndrome have been linked more heavily to members of underrepresented groups like people of color, women's, members of the LGBTQ plus community, etc. Why do you think this is the case? And leveraging your education and liberal arts and the social sciences, what's the sort of social reason for that?
Well, I think we need to think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and not just having these boxes that HR or whoever's in charge of these projects in your workplace or in a university environment. It's not something that you just check off, that you live and breathe. So for instance, one of the things that I've been encouraging colleagues on and off campus is not to ask people what their preferred pronoun is, because it's not preferred, it's their life. So to verify what pronoun you use, or to explain which pronoun you use, because you're explaining to someone that that's important. I gave a presentation about equity, diversity, and inclusion to a class of kinesiologists in another province. And it was really interesting to have that conversation about intake forms and pronouns, because some of these folks are going to be massage therapists or, somehow work with people and their bodies. And I said, if your intake form lists pronoun, you are saying a lot more about your business or the environment. You're saying to someone that you understand that this is important to them. You don't necessarily need to have an ad in the Pride brochure for your particular community. But there's little things that we can do to make people feel that they are included in your organization.
Yeah, I think definitely you touched on like the marketing piece, like having a Pride brochure, for example. I think the more companies can emulate the do it, don't say it sort of mentality, the better. And you spoke to a little bit my next question on what employers and peers in the industry can do to combat the experience of imposter syndrome with the little things, like you use the example of intake forms and not saying preferred pronoun. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that on what employers and peers in the industry can do to combat that experience?
Well, part of it reminds me of being a graduate student and reviewing poli-sci books, first year American politics books, for the representation of gender and people of color. And so I did this for the American Political Science Association, and by and large, I found that when we were talking about affirmative action, this is when there was figures or photos of people of color. We were talking about equal rights, photos of women. And my comment was, we need to embed diverse images and figures, information everywhere, and not just in the chapter on civil rights and civil liberties. In a similar way, last year I was using an American politics book for a course at UVic, and it's an open education resource with OpenStax, affiliated with Rice University in Texas. And I was using the book, and I found myself changing some of the verbiage under figures and photos, or not using some. And I made a throwaway comment on Twitter where I noted this is an issue. The editor contacted me the next day and said, I saw your tweet. I know you didn't call me out, but I want to hire you to review the book. And so I have. I've reviewed several chapters, and I have several more that I need to do. There was definitely a partisan and, in some areas, problematic bias. I've also suggested updating footnotes, that sort of thing, to ensure that there's more representation in terms of the type of political science that exists, let alone the array of different peoples in the United States. Because I do think it's important to see an array of different people in brochures, books, images, and when we are attending events that are work-related, the examples that are given by consultants or people who are giving presentations. Are they using only sports metaphors? You want to avoid that because not everyone is into, dare I say, hockey or whatever in the heck it might be. And so you need to think about that, the examples that you use, the names, that sort of thing. Just don't use Jack and Jill.
I think that's wonderful. And those are such great experiences that you have to share. So we've talked a little bit about some of the things that contribute to and amplify imposter syndrome. And I can see, I'm trying to keep up with the chat here. There's lots of questions coming in, but I can see there's a lot of questions about what the root cause of imposter syndrome is. You may not have the answer for that, but what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'm not a psychologist. You know, I joke with my partner that I have a PhD in psychology from Ladies' Home Journal, or Shadowline, I suppose, in Canada. You know, when you're just giving your opinion, and I'm quite opinionated. I noticed Nikki's comment there, and I'm going to read it. I'm liking the lens of imposter syndrome being because of others' biases. I've never thought of it that way, always thought of it as a lack on my part. This is the issue. People often will look in the mirror and think, I am not good enough. That's part of it, but another part of it is someone else looking at you and saying, you don't belong here. And so there's different ways in which imposter syndrome is played out, right? And I think that for me, I was really thinking of the way in which I've been treated, and not realizing that people expected less from me. Was there another comment that you wanted to look at, Carolyn?
There was just a little bit of, I'm just going back here, some back and forth on whether it was like a society, like nature versus nurture, sort of. Is this a societal thing, or is this something that is sort of embedded in our experiences?
I think it's both, really. You know, I was on Nextdoor for a little bit and then deleted the app on both my iDevices because I was getting really irritated with people commenting on really about young people and their ability to be able to afford housing, be it renting, in Saanich. And I just found so many of the comments quite elitist in terms of, you know, there's too many people living in that house. Everyone needs to be related. And for those of you who live in Vancouver, well, who live in BC or Toronto, especially GTA, you know that it's super expensive. And so we often find that a house, let's say there's 6 bedrooms, there might be 8 people living there. And it's a way for them to be able to afford to live here. And some folks, you know, on Nextdoor were trying to put together this petition to not allow this. And so when I filled out a housing survey, one of my council members posted it on Twitter, I was quite vocal about we need to stop penalizing working class, working poor, and young people for not being able to afford here. The petitions are wrong-headed, in my humble opinion. So I think there's an array of different biases. Not sure if I answered your question, Carolyn.
No, I think that's good. And I think going off of that and off of Nikki's point as well, with whom does the responsibility lie in dismantling the construct of imposter syndrome? Is it within the individual, or is it in families? Is it within the industry, the system, corporations?
It's all of us who are here and not here. I really liked how the Obama administration had this staff had this way of amplifying people who would speak, you know, saying, Carolyn had a really great comment, I want to build on that, instead of eschewing or not acknowledging what you said. So we are all responsible for that, making people feel welcome. And it can be, you know, being at a mixer and saying hello to people, not being very cliquish, that sort of thing. So I think we're all responsible for it. You know, some people will say if you're not invited to the table, flip the table. I don't know if that was Shirley Chisholm. I can't recall. It's too hot and I'm melting. But I think we're all responsible. It's not just HR, because at times our HR professionals at certain organizations are not the best suited for these conversations because they might be unaware of it.
I think that's really great. And I think it's important that it doesn't need to be this big shift for us to change this. It can be as small as saying hello, or making someone feel welcome by saying, building on this person's idea and acknowledging and giving them credit for their thoughts. I think that's really nice. and it makes it less intimidating too to face. So the next question is, some people point to feelings of inadequacy as a great catalyst for achieving more than one might have if they were more comfortable with themselves. Some household names that have suffered from strong feelings of self-doubt include Albert Einstein, Maya Angelou, and Sheryl Sandberg. Do you think there's any values in the feelings of imposter syndrome?
I think there is, to know that you're feeling human, because to not experience imposter syndrome, are we saying that you're boastful or arrogant? So it's important to feel human and think like, I got this. I got this. If I could speak to one or two of the chats, would that be okay, Carolyn?
Of course, go for it.
Okay, so I'm just gonna scroll up because it's moved to some. This issue, is it Jaya or Jaya?
Jaya.
Jaya, thank you. I just want, my name is Janai, I teach poli-sci, and my birthday's in July, so I'm very used to having to explain that. In terms of pronouns, one of the things that I've done is I've used my she, her, and hers buttons at events, or I'll introduce myself. I've made sure that at conferences or other events that my title, let's say a conference didn't have the pronoun stickers or a place for it, I've just added it. Janai, she, her, hers, Aragon, so that it becomes so common that you don't even really think about it in terms of the pronouns, and then it becomes easier to have that sort of conversation about pronouns, so that we normalize it. Okay, if we go to Marianne, how can marginalized people anticipate, circumvent, or circumnavigate the challenges? Oh, that's a big one. I think one of the things that you want to do is you need to have a posse to have these conversations with afterwards, because there's a little part of you that dies with each of those little cuts, those microaggressions. And you need to have someone to speak to. Is this okay? Who's going to back you up and say, that was wrong. That was really wrong. It's not just you. You're not being sensitive. You're not being difficult. So you need support. Also, a good thing to do is to document this in the workplace. Because if you start to have a pattern of stuff that's going on, then you can speak possibly to your supervisor, human resources, or people manager, whatever sort of title they might use in your workplace. But it's always good to have someone that you trust to first speak to about these things, because it is exhausting. I imagine for folks of color, women, our trans friends, siblings, non-binary friends, siblings, this is something that is experienced every day, that pause, like, who are you, sort of thing. And it can feel demoralizing to deal with. So it's always good to have someone to check in, be it if you're just going to have a glass of rosé and talk about things and strategize for the next time it happens. I find asking questions is a wonderful tool when something happens like that, because it causes the person who said something to respond. So, kill them with kindness, so to speak. Okay, Carolyn, let's move back to the questions. There's a ton in the chat, and I don't want to keep on scrolling.
We can definitely come back to those as well. So my next question is to do with sort of the situation that we're currently living in, and that is that work has gone through some really incredible changes in the last few months. And many would say we've been accelerated into this future of work that we've anticipated to see years down the line. How do you anticipate feelings of imposter syndrome will evolve in this new normal? And what have you witnessed in the changing world of work so far? Do you see it helping or hindering those who experience feelings of imposter syndrome, or those who are more vulnerable to those feelings?
I think one of the things that I'd like to see is more work prep in the trades and university environments. BCom programs have that down pat. The rest of campus, not so much. And we need to be able to do this. I can't tell you how many mentees I've had or letters of references that I've written where a student doesn't know how to self-promote. They don't think they've done that much. And then you look at their resume or they provide the LinkedIn URL and you look at it and they have all these skills, but they don't know how to speak to it. So part of it is coaching and sponsoring people around you. The next thing is with this future of work, given the pandemic, is networking is crucial. I mean, I know we all feel like we're working in our little home cubicles or whatever it is, and we're isolated. And I can't tell you how hard this has been for me as an energetic extrovert. I mean, when I see people on campus, I almost want to run and hug them, although I can't because of COVID and, keeping my bubble small. I live with an immune compromised person, so I need to be mindful of that. The other thing is you still can network, albeit it's a little different. Like we're in this networking session and I really hope to hear from people after the fact, be it on Twitter. I'm just at Janni Aragon. But networking, I know a lot of people who will do open Zoom sessions and they're all just working. But it is to be able to look up and chat or to have that 10-minute break in the 3-hour block to be able to chat with someone. Because we miss that, extrovert here, I miss that human interaction. I'm embarrassed to share, but I'll go ahead and share it. Yesterday I worked at Starbucks. I was one of the 3 lucky people to get a table, and I read a book there and took notes so I can begin my PowerPoints for one of my fall classes. I needed a different environment. And things have changed, so we need to adapt with it.
I think that's really important, and I really liked your point on self-promotion. And a lot of people who have tuned in today are in the midst of a career change, and so I think being able to self-promote and talk about your career experience and your skills, even after you've just experienced a layoff, for example, as millions of people have recently, I think that's really important. So if there's anything else you'd like to add to sort of that piece and changing careers, I think that would provide a lot of value.
Well, and this is exactly the situation that I've been in terms of being contacted by former students of mine, or even people in the community who work in media, contacting me via LinkedIn, are you aware of any jobs related to media on campus? And frankly, we have a hiring freeze at UVic right now through September 3rd. But that said, you really have to use your network and try to engage them. So you might have different account-a-buddies. So I have a few account-a-buddies. One is a current student of mine, and it's really about just little projects. But then I also have some peer account-a-buddies that I text, or we talk about whatever we're working on for particular projects. So having a network of people that you trust and can rely on is incredibly useful. Yeah, I think that's the answer to the question, Carolyn.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Collaboration and feeling supported in these uncertain times is definitely important. We also live in a society where we tell people to find their passion when they're looking for their next job or when they're looking to launch their career. And we say things like, if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Can you talk a little bit about why these sentiments might be dangerous and how they might contribute to feelings of imposter syndrome?
Well, I completely understand the sentiments. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I will often tell students, especially in the weekends or in the evenings when they email me, I'm so sorry to bother you during your personal time. And, you know, my first thought is, what is personal time? Especially during the pandemic. And I always say, don't apologize for contacting me. I'd rather hear what you have to say. And if you have this question, 3 to 5 others do as well. So I'd rather know than not know. And, you know, I will say I love my job, and I do, but it's still my job. It's not who I am as a person. And so it is work. And I do feel like I work. Like right now, I'm completely overwhelmed with a bunch of things related to work. Some of it is that I haven't heard back from the IT people about some issues that I was having 2 weeks ago. There's some emails that haven't been responded to. I have not heard back from people in a month, and I need deliverables from them. And, you know, it's hot. I'm tired, that sort of thing. And my course starts tomorrow. So I'm passionate about my job. I love it, but it is work. Now, imposter syndrome can be such, especially for academics, because so many of us become our job. And we think, well, if I'm passionate about my job, if I love my job, then it shouldn't be work. And that's really false. You know, we have to have that moment where we turn off and we take care of ourselves, or we just, you know, stream Disney Plus and watch The Child, aka Baby Yoda, because Baby Yoda is so freaking cute. So it's dangerous because people might think I'm not making a difference, because that's what I hear from so many young people. I want to make a difference. I want to be YouTube famous, et cetera, to temper our expectations. I don't want to necessarily say lower, but especially for millennials and Gen Z, you're going to have a lot of jobs. You know, gone are the days, at least, you know, for my parents, and they're boomers, they're young boomers at that. My dad had the same job for 45 years. People don't do that anymore. You know, in 4 to 5 years, you might have 2 or 3 jobs. So it's markedly different.
Can you talk at all, and I'm going a little bit off the cuff here, but can you talk at all about how you can separate yourself from your job? Because I think a lot of people have a hard time sort of tying themselves to that identity. And then those feelings of imposter syndrome aren't just at work, they're tied to their own personal life as well.
Right. Having those boundaries in terms of when you will work. One of the things that I've heard from so many people, and not just current and former students, colleagues as well, is they feel like they're working 10 to 12-hour days because of the pandemic, like that work never stops. And so I do think this is an unusual period right now with the pandemic. But that said, we need to stop thinking about self-care as being a luxury and having it be a necessity. So for instance, I always talk to my students, you know, in class about what I do for self-care, and what I call it my pretty princess routine. And they laugh because, you know, here they have this feminist Latina instructor using terms like that, pretty princess. They're like, what did she just say? You know, I have my diffuser. I mean, I have an entire thing that I do in terms of yoga and self-care. And when they hear it, they're like, wow, you do that. And I said, I have to recharge. I'm not the best person in terms of boundaries, for an example, with emails boundaries, because I tend to respond to emails almost 24/7. I don't want to come into work Monday and have 200 or 400 emails. So I will nickel and dime throughout the weekend with the emails during the term. And given that this class is compacted, it's going to be bananas. And I'm prepared for that. But I do have colleagues who do not respond to email after Friday at 5 o'clock. Everything from then on is treated as an 8 a.m. Monday email. And I will say this, students don't like it. They will talk about how this person is not flexible, doesn't care, et cetera, et cetera. And I kind of, I understand the student's point of view. If there's something due, the professor definitely should look at the emails over the weekend. But I also have a sense of, wow, I'm glad that works for you, for the colleagues that have that great boundaries.
I think that's wonderful. I've definitely never had a professor talk to me about those things, and education is the springboard for our career. So I think having that conversation at the educational level is a really great foundation for us going into our careers. I can see that there's a little bit of conversation in the chat about one of our earlier questions about the how there can be, I think from an employer's point of view, a value in employees feeling those feelings of imposter syndrome. I know there was a study done on Google, and imposter syndrome is very high in their employees, but they have never addressed it because it sort of drives them forward. Can you help us unpack that a little bit, and what the dangers are in seeing value in imposter syndrome, and why that's maybe a myth?
Yeah, I don't think there's a value in having people feel like they don't belong. I mean, that sounds like a toxic work culture. It sounds like working in a hedge fund. If you don't meet your numbers, you lose your job. You know, where it's very cutthroat, you know, people have ulcers, that sort of thing, anxiety, panic attacks in the washroom. You don't want to work for an most people would not thrive in an organization like that. You want people to feel like they are part of your work culture, that they belong, that you are valued. You know, you want to feel like you fit in at work. Like it's a place where you can thrive. Not that it's home. I mean, one of the issues with, you know, the ping pong tables, beer, et cetera, I often feel is, you know, they're able to make work fun so that you can work 12 to 18 hours a day. I mean, I took a tour of the workday areas, and, you know, I smiled. I thought this looks awesome. I couldn't work there, hot desking, and I don't care about the beer taps. I want to know that my day ends at a particular time. And no offense to anyone who works at Workday, great organization. The local people are fantastic as well. It's just, it's not the sort of environment that someone like me, I wouldn't thrive there, and not everyone would.
And I think that's a matter of knowing yourself too, and what works for you. I think that clarified some of the discussion that was happening in the chat. And I think just to echo what Miriam put in there, a lot of people's imposter syndrome makes them overwork and burn out, which is another dangerous side of when people appear to be high achievers. And I think that's definitely part of what you're saying, and part of the dangers of this phenomenon of imposter syndrome. And it seems to be particularly prominent in tech and in startups. I definitely want to leave some time for people to even turn on their mic and ask questions, or more questions in the chat. But maybe to get things going, I'm sure there are people in the audience, and some have already shared. When have you felt feelings of imposter syndrome? Maybe turn on your mic, or you can put them in the chat. When is that particularly prominent for you? And Janai, if you have an experience that you'd like to share to maybe get the conversation going, that would be awesome.
I'll start. I was promoted into academic administration, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. So I moved from being full-time faculty into being an administrator. And the almost 5 years that I was in this role, I really loved it. I'd say for the first 3 years. And, you know, like many big organizations, we have a revolving door of leaders. So I think I've reported to 5 different VPs or an executive director. The terrible thing about universities is that most of us aren't trained in leadership. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the folks over in Gustafson School of Business are good at it either, for that matter. But I've been lucky. You know, I've attended a whole whack of different leadership training opportunities, you know, a year long one, summer, et cetera, et cetera. So, but what I found is I had this moment where I thought, is it me? You know, I was invited to new events, and I'd been invited for the previous 4 or 5 years, where you meet new colleagues, faculty, other leaders, this sort of thing. It was in my Outlook, and then a day before it disappeared. Nobody talked to me about it. And this continued to happen. And so I contacted my one-up to find out what was going on. And this person wasn't, I'm just going to use they, although this person doesn't use they, but I got to protect myself. This person didn't know what I was talking about. You know, just what did I hear from them? Oh, now that I'm in charge, I should go to these events. And previously, I was the one going, but I wasn't notified. And so I had this like 3-month period where I thought, am I not doing my job? What's going on? So we had an emergency meeting. They referred to it as an emergency meeting. And I really talked about how communication is important to me and transparency. And I thought the meeting went okay. But then at the end of the meeting, this person said, well, I'm glad we had this meeting. And next time you're concerned for your job, you know, let me know and we'll meet again. And I paused and said, I was never concerned for my job. I'm concerned about your communication style. And it hit me that there was no future for me working with that person. Their communication style doesn't exist, really. They're completely different. And yeah, it just wasn't going to work. And this sort of lack of communication has really continued in this organization, sadly. But I'm glad to be back into full-time teaching. It's something that I do enjoy, and my students are wonderful. But my point is, after being promoted and supported and coached by a VP and a provost, you know, 3 years later, I had these moments of panic / imposter syndrome, thinking, am I not doing well? What's going on? And there just comes a time in an organization where you have to really read the room and understand that maybe it's not working out. Maybe it's not about you, it's something else. And that was, it was a hard realization, but it was a good one because I am definitely happier with my career. So what sort of comments from attendees?
Yeah, so we have Marian in the chat saying, boys treating our higher level mathematics class like it was a fraternity and gatekeeping mathematics from me, even though I, the only girl, was outscoring them on assessments. Very cool, Marian. Congratulations on getting such high scores. That's awesome. And Sonia says, I feel imposter syndrome almost all day, every day. Her educational background is not the same sector as my working life, so on paper, so I don't make sense to a lot of people. I think a lot of people in tech particularly feel that way because so many people have winding journeys into that industry. And also focusing on self-promotion aspect. Sorry, Janai, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is I can't tell you how many tech conferences that I've been to, and a colleague will find out that I'm a political scientist and kind of shake their head and say, how did you get to where you are? And I said, this, you know, circuitous path. I think if you are having those, you know, those moments, or maybe it's days of self-doubt, it's really good to have a mentor or a coach to help you work through that. Because sometimes you might find that it's a particular colleague or supervisor at work who is instilling that self-doubt in you. I know we've all read chats in Slack or text messages or emails that are passive aggressive, and you're like, did this person not proof this before they sent it? And oftentimes it says more about the person that sent that message or posted that message than you, although it does sting. I'm just looking at Torben's. Just scroll up. You guys are very active. This is good.
Yeah, this is great.
Yes, yes, not belonging. Feeling like you don't belong. That's part of imposter syndrome. You know, my kids for a few years went to a private independent day school, and in Victoria, and I can remember before spring break, and the school spring break didn't coincide with the university spring break. And I'll never forget the first time I heard about where was I spring breaking. And I said, the university. They're like, oh, you can't get away. And I said, no, it's my job. Where I really realized this vast class divide. And frankly, I've noticed that before in higher ed, being a first generation college student. So my parents didn't graduate from high school, let alone attend university. So Torben, I completely understand what you're saying. I grew up working class, the oldest of 5, and I have a lot of empathy for what you've shared. Although I'm not an introvert, and I've learned how to modulate my speech and my hand movement to not scare my introvert students and colleagues.
I think there are so many in this chat that a lot of people can relate to, so it's warming my heart a little bit seeing that.
I saw a good one, Janai, that came up, and I think it's been buried, but how long do you think it's going to be until we start having positive change in these regards?
Well, I think that it can be fast if management supports it. And it's not a one and done sort of thing, it's ongoing in terms of having a work culture that is supportive. And I'm not talking about, fun, the ping pong table, beer, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about the day-to-day work culture, the way in which people are treated. Memos that go out to staff, posts within the Slack channel, et cetera, et cetera. It's really going to cause leaders and people managers to be introspective and think about everything that they do so that it becomes better. And there might be trip ups occasionally. I mean, we're human, but it's something that we have to work on all the time. And the whole thing about people saying they could do your job, oh, I have heard that as well. Oh, I've read this book that, so-and-so wrote. I could probably teach your class. And I'm thinking, really? Really? This is an area of expertise for me. I have a 400-page dissertation. I've dedicated my entire life to this. You've read one book that's kind of a beach read, and you think you can teach my class? Wow. You got to smile. I'm smiling deeply here. But I'm sure at work that is soul crushing when you keep on hearing that. It's like the old examples with the salespeople. They bring in the money and they can do anything, as opposed to, other workers in the business.
So I think just from what people are throwing in the chat, and Tanis added a really great point, where do you find a mentor or a coach to help you work through that? Or also, given that a lot of these are work related, how do you talk to a manager about this, or a coworker? Or how do you as an individual sort of create change from the bottom up within your organization?
I think these are difficult conversations. Because just imagine going to your one-up and saying, I'd really like us to talk about working on the culture here. Ooh, that's a doozy. So you need to find allies at work, and you need to think about maybe putting together events. The other thing, the first thing that you said in terms of mentors, contact people that you respect, that that you've heard of. Maybe contact them on LinkedIn, or, the YYJ Tech Ladies, that sort of thing, or some other network that you might have in your region, and talk to them about what they do. Find out if they'd be willing to have coffee, virtual or not, today, and go from there, as well. I mean, a lot of people are super busy and they're not interested in doing more. But there's an equal amount of people who will hear, I'd really like to work with you. Do you have time once a month for an hour for us to chat? Or maybe coordinate a coaching or sponsoring event at your workplace, or several different tech companies, organizations, in order to pair people up. And it could be such that you have someone that is a year or 2 years ahead of you in terms of work in the tech industry that might be really useful for you. I found, because not only am I a BCom mentor, I'm also a mentor to the MBA program for students. I have many MBA students where it's just kind of a one and done. They didn't get promoted and they want to talk about that. Or they're having issues with their committee for the project. And I'm not threatening because I'm not on their committee. And they just want to figure out, how do I work this out? So it's good to have someone that you can bounce ideas off, and it could be a one and done or an ongoing relationship.
Yeah, definitely finding a network of people that you can trust. And Jennifer added that her personal experience is full of lots of encouragement and networking and connections, which can help lessen feelings of imposter syndrome. So I think that's really great. And just being conscious of time here, I want to make sure that I ask you, Janni, to let everyone know how they can follow along with the work that you're doing, and keep in touch with your work.
Sorry, typing.
Highly recommend following Janni on Twitter. Very active.
Yeah, maybe a little too active. One of my kids doesn't follow me anymore, my teenager. She said, "You tweet too much. It's just mommy." I said, "Okay, you can always mute." But she said, I have to unfollow. Follow people on LinkedIn or GitHub, wherever you are, that you're interested in. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're looking for work. I find that lots of people, when they hear that you're interested in what they're doing, they will make time for you. You know, it's a little itty bitty Jiminy Cricket that's narcissistic. You want to talk to me about me? Okay.
Yeah, well, and people can have imposter syndrome about reaching out to people that they look up to as well, right? So
yeah, I'm not good enough. How can I think that I'm going to contact this person? And I got to tell you, when I contact people and say, like, I read your article, I loved it, can't wait to hear more about what you're doing, no one has ever said, "Who are you? Why are you bothering me?" They're always like, "Wow, thank you. I really needed this. I'm having a crappy day. And to hear that this book made such an impact," or, you know, whatever it is, thank you. Just be brave.
definitely, I think there's an element of bravery there, and I think that's a really great way to wrap things up. So everyone go follow Janni on Twitter. And thank you everyone for being here and asking such great questions and being so active in the chat. I think that was also a really a big added value to this experience, just seeing that we're all not alone in this. So that's really great. And thank you, Janni, not only for being here today, but for the work that you're doing in our education systems, in your personal life, and in your professional life. It is very much appreciated and will have a ripple effect.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the invitation. And I love all the comments, people. I mean, I'm definitely going to go through and read more of them. Thank you for being honest and for being vulnerable with your honesty, because it's not easy to say, "I feel like I'm an imposter when." So I appreciate you for your honesty. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll keep that conversation going. I feel like I'm an imposter when. I think that's a really great springboard, you know? Okay, well, thank you so much. And we hope to see you all at the next Imposter Syndrome event. Bye now.
Okay. Bye, everyone.